Hello, MUS119. This video is going to cover modules 3A and 3B, which is an intro to scales and tonality, as well as major scales. We're going to go over how to construct and identify major scales after our small introduction. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is tonality. Tonality is a term used to describe the unique sound heard between harmonies and melodies together. Tonal music is a system where a specific note acts as the tonic or home, and in Western classical music, a lot of it is based off of tonal music. So, this piece is going to be based in the key of C major, meaning that C is our tonic. So you have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C to build notes off of within your melodies. So using an organized set of whole and half steps, we can create what is known as a scale that is unique to that set of pitches. So some scales have flats, some have sharps, some have accidentals, and regardless, there are no two scales that have the same accidentals in the same place. However, they will have the same makeup of whole and half steps to make it whatever modality it is. So major, minor, we're not going to talk about anything else in this class aside from major and minor. But, So that's what we have on tonality. Everything is kind of based around, whatever key it is. So if I say, this piece is in the key of G, well, that means that it's based on G being my tonic, and every other note in that chord is based off of the key of G major. Yeah, so we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about chords in, I believe, week 4. So scale organization. Scales are comprised of whole and half steps. The first note of the scale, or the tonic, is the most important note. All other pitches in the scale are in relation to the tonic. So we can hear the tension and release through a scale. So let's listen. So we have C here, which is our tonic. We have D, which is our supertonic. We have 3, our median. 4, subdominant, because it comes right before the dominant, which is our 5th scale degree, G. A is our submediant. Our leading tone, bringing us back to the tonic, is 1. Really, what you'll hear me use in this class is for sure tonic and perhaps dominant when referring to the 5th scale degree, especially when we start discussing chords. So in our tonal music organization, we use 2 primary modes or kinds of scales in tonal music, which are major and minor. So this video is going to cover up the major scale and how to write that. So the pattern of whole and half steps that form a major scale is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So if you see here, you have a C major scale, right? We have all of our notes comprised. So if I were to look, I have a C to a D, right? You have a whole step, half, whole, 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 half. And that's what it will be like for every major scale. Same here with the G major scale. If you look at a piano, which I hope that I would have put on here, but I didn't. If you looked at a piano, if I drew one down here, you'd have your black keys, right? So you have C, D, E, F, G, and A, and B. Okay, right? So this is my makeshift keyboard. If you look between C to D, you have a whole step between C to D because you have 2 half steps, right? So that's a whole step. Between D to E, you have a whole step, right? Between E to F, you have that half step. Between F to G, you have a whole step. Between G to A, you have a whole step. And between A to B, you have a whole step. And then if I drew an imaginary C, that would be your half step there. So that's how we got that. The same works for your G major scale. If you looked at a piano, it would be the same concept. So if I were to play this, it sounds like this, C major. Same with G. And I really want you to listen to that kind of second to last note, your leading tone, leading towards the tonic again. So here we have a G. You can kind of hear that tension and release going back to the tonic. It kind of builds up there. So that's like that for any major scale that you're writing. So, a couple observations. There are 7 pitches before the first or tonic note is repeated. Until the repeated note, every note name, so A, B, C, D, E, F, G, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, appears once and only once, whether it is a natural, a sharp, or a flat note. There will never be 2 of the same note names on any scale, nor will any note name ever be omitted. So this is really important to note in your scales. You kind of want to think about this as the ladder metaphor, I guess, that I was talking about before. You never want to skip any steps on the ladder. It's kind of like creating 2 diatonic whole steps, half steps, or a whole and a half step above a given note, but like with 7 notes now. So, a major scale can be built on every one of the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, all notes between C and B consecutively. So you could have, a C major scale, you could have an E major scale, you could have an F sharp or G flat major scale, you could have an A flat major scale or G sharp. So those are all your possibilities. Literally any key on the piano between C and B natural can become a tonic for a major or minor scale. Every scale will have a different combination of natural, flat, and sharp notes, as you saw here. In your C major scale, you have no sharps and no flats to get the whole, half pattern, but with G major, you have to add an F sharp. So every number of accidentals or lack thereof will be different depending on the scale, and every major scale can have the following. This is really important that when you're writing these that you're using the correct accidentals. So there's some keys or scales that have sharp notes and others that have flat notes. So you can have a combination of natural and sharp notes, natural and flat notes, all flat notes or all sharp notes, but they will never ever have both sharp and flat notes. I would not write this F sharp here as a G flat. Why? Because then we're skipping a note name. We're omitting an F, right? So you have to make that an F sharp rather than a G flat, because you need to make sure you have one of every note name and that you're creating a whole step above E, which is easiest seen as F sharp. So constructing a major scale, let's try E major and G flat major. So we're going to begin on the tonic note. We're going to write every single note name from E to E. Man, I didn't even give myself a piece of staff paper. Let's see here. All right. So we're going to write an E major scale, right? So I'm going to write my tonic, which is E. I'm going to write all the preceding notes. A, B, C, D, and E. I'm going to write the tonic again. I'll write E major on top. Right. So the next step is to write the sequence of whole and half steps for a major scale, which we know is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Alternatively, this can be written as W, W, H, W, 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 H, just so that you're able to see it. So now we need to pull out our little piano, which I'm going to just put right here. And if I look between E and F, we know that that's a half step, right? So what do we need to do to create a whole step there? If you said add A sharp, you are 100% right. So we're going to add a sharp there. What about between F sharp and G? Oh, by the way, you're always going to want to start the intervals from your tonic up. So you start from the left part of the scale all the way up to the right to get each note name. Continuing on, so you have an F sharp here, right? And between F sharp to G, you want a whole step. So between F sharp to G is a half step, so you may need to make that G a G sharp. Between G sharp to A, you need a half step, which we have between G sharp to A, right? So we don't have to change anything there. Between A to B, you need a whole step. But between A to B, you already have one, so you don't have to change anything. Between B and C, you need a whole step as well. So you have between B and C, which is a whole, between B to C is, hold up. Did I write my piano wrong? A, B, C. Yeah, I did write my piano wrong. This is so embarrassing. Oopsies. Okay, between B and C is a half step. Ah, that looks right. I was like, there's too many black keys in a row. So you have between B and C, right? Between B and C is a half step, so you need to make that a whole step by making that a C sharp. Between C sharp to D, you need a whole step, but you only have a half step, right? So we need to make this a D what? A D sharp, not an E flat, and then you have an E natural. So that is your E major scale. You have a whole step, another whole step, and that is your E major scale. Now, I think the other one I said was to do G flat major. So let's see what we did. G flat major. Actually, let's skip that and let's do the first half of exercise 4C, which is, by the way, extra and not mandatory. But if you would like to submit it, you can, and I can give you some feedback on it to make sure that you're doing the right stuff. So over here, we have a C flat major scale, right? And we're in treble clef. So first things first that we're going to do is write out every note of the scale. So we're starting with C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? And we know it's a C flat. We need to make sure if you have a flat or a sharp that you're starting with a sharp, right? So you have a C flat, and I'm going to put a C flat there. The next thing I'm going to do is write out my whole and half steps. So I have a whole, half, whole, half, right? So between C flat to D, I need a whole step. And to have that, I need to have a D flat. Between D flat to E, you need a whole step. But right now, you have 1, 2, 3 half steps if you follow along with me on a piano. But you need to make that 2. So if you have 1 half step too many to a natural note, you need to make that note change, right? So which way do we need it to change? Sharp or flat? If you said flat, you are completely correct. 1, because you have the flats in the C flat major scale, but also you wouldn't write a sharp note, because that would further the half step between D flat and E. So now if we look between E flat to F, you need to have a half step. Do you have a half step, or is there something that needs to be changed? You do not have a half step. You need to change that F, because between E flat to F is a whole step, but you need a half step. So think about how you can lower that F by 1 half step. That is with a flat, correct? Between F flat to G, you need a whole step, which you do not have, so you need to have a G flat. So you could think about this kind of like your F flat, right? Between F and G. You could think about your F flat being an E natural. So if you looked between F flat right here, right, and G up here, you have 1, 2, 3 half steps, but you need to have 2. So you need to have that G flat. Cool. Then between G flat to A, how would you create that half step? With a flat, I hope you said. Between A flat to B, you need a whole step, but you have 3 half steps here, which is a whole step and a half, which needs to be a B flat. Sorry, oh my gosh. And then a C flat. So C flat major has all 7 flats in it. It sounds like this. Cool. So So enharmonically, you could also write this out as a B major scale, but your B major scale is going to have different accidentals. So if you would like to try that out, you can practice that. They will sound the same, but will be written out differently. So the next one I want to touch on is this E flat major scale. So the first thing we're going to do is write out all of our notes in the scale. So we have, let's start down here, E flat, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. And because in my tonic here it says E flat, I'm going to add an E flat to both of those. Next step is writing out my whole and half steps. Whole, half. Whole, half. Right? So if I'm looking between E flat to F, do you have a whole step? Yeah, you do. You don't have to change anything. What about between F and G? Take a look on your piano and see if you have a whole or a half step. You got a whole step. Between G to A, you have a whole step, right? But we need it to be a half step. So how are we going to adjust the A to make it sound as a half step between G and A? You would add a flat. So you would have an A flat. What about between A flat and B? You have 3 half steps, but you need to have 2 half steps or a whole step. Good. So you have a G flat. Then you have, a B flat. Then between B flat to C, you need a whole step, which you have because you know that between B and C is one of those half steps on the piano because there's no black key between them. Then you have between C and D. Do you have a whole step? Yeah, you do. And then between D and E flat, you have your half step. So this E flat major scale sounds like this. Alright, so I'll let you try the rest by yourself if you would like to pause the video, and I will write out the answers so that you are able to see what the correct answers are. So if you'd like to pause the video now, you can, and I'll write out the rest. And you can email me with any questions that you have about writing out major scales. I think it just takes practice. Alright, so these are your major scales. Here you always have a whole, half pattern. You can email me if you have any questions. And to follow this lecture, you should read Chapter 4 in the textbook. Exercises 4B and 4C, which is extra not mandatory, contain content from this lecture. So if you want more practice, you could do that. Or also check the syllabus at the bottom and see the extra links that we have there for major scale creation and identification. Alright, I'll see you in the next module.